it is true that nobody actually told you that it was Dan that had been killed until Detective Posey, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that was during that interview?
Yes.
Okay. But you stated that Karen called you before you went into that interview.
Yes.
Dan's mother, Karen.
Yes.
And that you told her that it was Dan and that he was dead.
Yes.
Based on the fact that you thought that Dan had been killed.
It was more than think.
But you hadn't been told.
I had not been told, but I had not heard from him. All of his friends avoided looking at me, and the police officers knew who I was before I got there, and one police officer hugged me. This is not good news I'm going to hear.
What if you were wrong?
Then I would have called Karen and said, happy days, I was wrong. And Karen and I would have celebrated, and we would have laughed, and we would have had family jokes about this for 20 years, and it would have been much, much better than it turned out.
All right, Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, look, couple of areas of potential deception here, and I'll let you go back and take a look at where they are. But look out for vocal clicks. That's when this happens. There's one right at the start, and there's one maybe, let's just say, around halfway through. You'll find them. And then we get something very different happening with her eyes at the same time. The first time with that vocal click, we get an eye block. She just closes her eyes. Again, none of that means that somebody is lying or being deceptive, but it's out of baseline of what we saw in the earlier video where, you know, she's comfortable, and here she's deviated from that baseline. Vocal click about halfway through, and then her eyes deviate up, and I think to her left, I think. Now, I'm not going to go into what that might mean in terms of the thought process, simply that it's enough difference from how her eyes normally are that I would go, well, there's something definitely going on here, which is out of the ordinary, out of the norm. So 2 points there. One question that I have that I'd like answered, what's the headphones about? I dream and imagine that she's listening to Fleetwood Mac at this point. I don't know why Fleetwood Mac. I'm just picking Fleetwood Mac. I think it'd be nice to be listening to Fleetwood Mac at this point. She seems to be a kind of a Fleetwood Mac kind of lady. But anyway, if anybody can tell me why she's got those headphones in, I'd like to know. Scott, what do you got on this one?
All right. Maybe it's hard to hear from because they're so far apart. They plugged her in to hear what's happening. That's the only thing I can figure out. Because
she's hard of hearing. She is hard of hearing. So they gave her that early to make sure she could hear. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, I think this is a great example of a prepared answer with a plethora of extra information that has nothing to do with what's going on. It does, but it doesn't. It's like when somebody tells you a ghost story, and when I hear ghost stories, there are some I hear and I go, I really believe they saw something. Or I'm not saying I believe in ghosts. I'm just saying something happened to that person. Then you have that person who sets up the entire scene. They go through and tell you step by step, and they set up where things were in the room and those kind of things. The person who actually did experience something, in my opinion, they come in and go, dude, I saw a ghost. Don't tell me about that. We're standing right here and this thing walks out of the closet. They don't go through, we were outside and we walked in and give you a reason they're there. She's adding all these qualifiers to her answer. This is one of the things that lets us know or suggests that something's up here. Something's not right about what she's doing. As it goes through, we see her blink rate increase a little bit. Her head movements and her head gesturing increase a little bit. No real big illustrators or anything up till now. Her volume is strong and becomes stronger as she goes along. She uses a lot of the one-word answers when she knows the answer is yes or no or whatever. She's boom, boom, does those. That's fine. That's squiggling her seat at the end. That, in my opinion, would be she's saying, I'm finished, and there it is. There's what I prepared. There's my story. The only thing she doesn't say is, and I'm sticking to it. She tries to, but she changes it as she goes along, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Chase, what do you got?
Yeah, these first three questions are showing us something unusual here. In question one, which she would not have to cognitively even process, we're seeing artificial cognitive processing, which I made that term up. And this is where she's moving her eyes to access a memory while pausing and hesitating, which is inappropriate for this question. But she's learned this behavior is a time-buying device. So she may throw it in at inappropriate times because she's not sure. She's sure that it buys time, but not how. In question 2 and 3, we're seeing something I call immediate mouth closure. And this is where she shuts her mouth and her lips close right after her answer. This does not mean deception per se, but when it's a deviation from baseline this far, it's a lot more likely to indicate deception. But there's one other time you're likely to see a spike in this behavior. And this is when we're being confronted or questioned by an adversarial or maybe a confrontational person. We're more likely to see this lip closing behavior. So keep that in mind. There's some context to this. And there was this thing of, I would have called Kelly and said, oh, happy days. I was wrong. Her head is now vacillating between shaking and nodding. And this is an incongruence signal that the brain isn't fully sure how to display a behavior. The emphasis here is on the word display. I didn't use the word express and emotion or convey a story. This is a conscious display, and the brain is under stress here. And this is called cognitive load, how much stress is on the brain. And the things that are adding to this here, and the stress, deception, the perception management, stress, deception, perception management, an adversarial interview, the presence of cameras, managing nonverbal expressions, her cognitive load is why we're seeing her body disagreeing with itself. It doesn't mean her cognitive load is excusing her deception signals, but we're seeing a person under a high degree of cognitive load aside from also having to be deceptive. Just wanted to point that out. That's all I got. And I was just waiting on you, Greg. Go ahead.
Yeah, so let's walk through a few things. We are all seeing a lot of the same things. Number one, yes. Pay attention to the way she says yes. Yes, yes. Sometimes she'll say yes. Yes is a tool for her. It's not a word. It's a tool. It's a delaying technique. It's a way for her to say, I'm going to accept that. No, I don't accept this. Pay attention throughout here. That's number one. Number two, when she breaks eye contact, I would usually say yes, she might be trying to think, but she isn't, because when we find her later going to retrieve data, it's the opposite side of her head. This is an avoidance eye move access, exactly what you said, Chase. She's getting away from it, so she darts this way. I don't think there's any thought process at all. I think it's a break. If you really want to pay attention, Mark, I think when he starts to put her on notice with this question is when I hear that first pseudo click. It's hard to hear, but she does it for sure. There's an interesting couple of things going on here. That head bobble. I said in my notes, you guys know who Doris Roberts is? Famous actor. She looks like a bobblehead of Doris Roberts sitting there doing, bobbling her head around. And it'll get more pronounced as she gets less and less certain. It's really powerful to watch. She's got disdain and disapproval on the side of her mouth and some outright contempt. That left lip is almost quivering. She's so contemptuous of him when he's asking that one question. I think here's the problem. There's a lot of stuff you can prepare for when you're deconflicting. What person sits around in their house and comes up with an excuse for why they told the mother her son is dead? How could you come up with that? Okay, hey, I think something's wrong. Your son may be injured. Something's wrong. Okay, I got it. Your son is dead. How do you come back from that? There's not a place you go from that. So no matter how much deconflicting she's had, when she's sitting there, we see that head bobble because I think, to your point, Chase, there's no rational way she can deconflict that. All the time she's rolled things around in her head. And then she does that elevated blink rate right after the question. And then she does kind of that chained elephant in the chair. The good thing is, as we age, we get less and less active. We use our shoulders less and less. So it gets easier for people to hide things. However, she's not hiding because she shuffles around the chair and gets comfortable.
It is true that nobody actually told you that it was Dan that had been killed until Detective Posey, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that was during that interview?
Yes.
Okay. But you stated that Karen called you before you went into that interview.
Yes.
Dan's mother, Karen.
Yes.
And that you told her that it was Dan and that he was dead.
Yes.
Based on the fact that you thought that Dan had been killed.
It was more than think.
But you hadn't been told.
I had not been told, but I had not heard from him. All of his friends avoided looking at me. And the police officers knew who I was before I got there, and one police officer hugged me. This is not good news I'm going to hear.
What if you were wrong?
Then I would have called Karen and said, happy days, I was wrong. And Karen and I would have celebrated, and we would have laughed, and we would have had family jokes about this for 20 years, and it would have been much, much better than it turned out.
If you like this video, get the full body language breakdown and analysis on our main channel by clicking this video right here.